Let me try it in a calmer voice. Howdy. I'm Frank Ashley, Senior Associate Dean here at the Bush School of Government, Public Service, and on behalf of our Dean, Mark Welsh, I'd like to welcome everyone to negotiating the USMCA, Domestic and International Challenges, which is part of the other side of the border, ties that bind and issues that divide. This is a speaker series featuring practitioners working on the border, Mexico, and Latin America. Tonight, we're really honored, truly honored to have hear from U.S. Congressman Kevin Brady, who's the representative of the 8th Congressional District of Texas and the Republican leader of the House Ways and Means Committee. But first, there are a few individuals who I really like to recognize. Former U.S. Congressman Bill Flores and his wife Gina. We have members of the Bush School Advisory Board, Lieutenant General Randolph and Mrs. Jeannie House. Mr. Royce Hickman. We have the CEO of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation, Max Angerholzer. The director of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum, Warren French. And the vice president of Texas A&M University Government Relations, Norman Garza. We'd also like to welcome our Zoom audience, all of you up there, and especially Neil Bush. Neil's on Zoom right now. Neil serves on the George and Barbara Bush Foundation Board of Directors. And would like to definitely welcome him and all the others who are Zooming tonight. We know that we could not have an event like this without our sponsors, so we'd really like to thank the Mossbacher Institute for Trade, Economics, and Public Policy, and also the Colors H. Cantu Hispanic Education and Opportunity Endowment. And I'd like to recognize the director of the Cantu Endowment, Felipe Hinojosa, who's with us this evening. Back there in the back, thank you, Felipe. I'd now like to invite to the stage Dr. Raymond Robertson, the director of the Mosbacher Institute, who will now introduce our speaker for the evening.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that introduction. It's always great. I just told Frank that every event's better when Frank shows up, you know what I'm saying? And I feel the same way actually about all of you tonight. I really am really glad to see you. That we're coming out of COVID, of course, and it's 30 and rainy, which is the worst weather possible. So we really, really appreciate the extra effort you all made to join us tonight. I'm going to be introducing our speakers tonight. First, I'd like to start with introducing Professor Eileen Teague, who's the series organizer in collaboration, of course, with the Mossbacher Institute's Border Migration Program, as Frank just mentioned. The Border Migration Program is a recent initiative that we launched at the Mossbacher Institute with the objective of producing rigorous research on migration and economic border flows and enhancing evidence-driven policymaking and community engagement with events just like this one. We're so thrilled to collaborate with associate faculty, not just at the Bush School, but around the entire campus, and a couple of those are here tonight. So thank you all so much for joining us. But to focus on Professor Teague, who's one of my favorite colleagues, I will say she joined the Bush School's Department of International Affairs as an assistant professor back in the fall of 2020. She previously held a postdoctoral fellowship at Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs after earning her PhD in history from Vanderbilt University in 2018. She was born in Colón, Panama, and traveled the world as part of a military family and served in the U.S. Marine Corps from 2006 to 2014, and teaches classes now on American history, U.S. relations with Mexico and Latin America, as well as thematic courses addressing issues with interventionism, drug enforcement, national security, and addiction in U.S. society. She really enjoys providing a voice on how history has shaped current social and political issues, and it's really an honor for us at the Mossbacher Institute to be working with her on this speaker series. It's just been a delight across the board because it really helps us shed a lot of light on so many of the important issues related to migration and the border, especially the USMCA, which we'll be talking about in just a moment. Tonight, Dr. Teague is going to, just to let you know how we're going to run the program, Dr. Teague is going to be engaging our speaker after the main remarks with some questions and answers. If you'd like to get in on that, we provided a QR code, and for those of you who are closer to my age and maybe older, that's the weird squares on the program. You can zap that with your phone, and it'll pop up a little website where you can introduce some of your own questions, and then Professor Teague will grab those and try and ask those to the speaker. But obviously, if you have trouble with this, as I would if I was trying to do it, we have lots of awesome ambassadors who are Bush School students who are willing to help you. They're usually in the back, and just kind of raise your hand or whatever, and they'll help you figure that out if you need some help with that. Now I'd like to get to the main event, which is introducing our speaker for the evening, U.S. Congressman Kevin Brady. Congressman Brady is a pro-family, pro-business conservative who proudly represents the 8th Congressional District of Texas. He hardly needs an introduction with this group, but I'd really like to share some of the bit about his background for those of you maybe on the internet. But Brady's only the third Texan in history to lead the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, which is considered, as most of you know, to be the most influential committee in Congress. It has control over taxes, international trade, health care, Medicare, Social Security, and welfare. He currently serves as the highest ranking Republican on that committee, so we're just so exceptionally honored that he would spend some of his time with us tonight. Just to give you an idea of some of his many, many accomplishments, he led the effort to pass the historic Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is the first comprehensive overhaul of America's tax system in more than 30 years. I figured that would get applause, but we'll keep going. Yeah, I thought so. And as a recognized leader on free trade, he has helped successfully secure the passage of 13 of America's 15 trade agreements, including President Trump's U.S.-Canada Mexico agreement, the Usmca, that we'll be talking about tonight. His successful achievements also include negotiating an end to the 40-year ban on selling U.S. crude overseas, which is phenomenal. That's another fantastic accomplishment. You can applaud if you want. That's good. That'd be great. He also was engaged deeply in the first reform of the IRS in 2 decades, a sweeping okay, there you go. That's great. And also sweeping reform of America's retirement system, banning surprise medical bills, eliminating the Obamacare individual mandate, and making the research and development tax cut permanent. Prior to his election in Congress, he worked as a member of the Chamber of Commerce executive for 18 years with Royce, and they had a great relationship there. That's really exciting, and served 6 years in the Texas House of Representatives. To stay close to the people he represents, I'm really excited to say, and he's very proud of the fact that he never moved to Washington and lives in the Woodlands with his wife and 2 sons. He's logged more than 2.5 million miles commuting from Texas to Congress, which is about the same as 5 round trips to the moon. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Brady. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
That was terrific. Well, first, thank you, Dr. Robertson, for that kind introduction. Thanks for your leadership of the foundation as well. And this is really a great day for me. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this, really distinguished lecture series and just being back at the school. I too want to thank Felipe, who holds the Carlos Cantu Endowment for sponsoring, and Mossbacher Institute for sponsoring today's event. Raymond, again, thank you for all your great leadership. And it is, for me, the work that you've been doing, Dr. Teague, today, and not just today, but the students we got a chance to meet earlier, sort of your whole line of work and body of work is just so impressive. So thank you for all that you do. I am Chancellor Sharp. It is always a good day to see Chancellor Sharp. The leadership of this system is second to none in the school's history, making a huge difference throughout this state, and I'd argue throughout this country as well. That is true leadership every day of the year. Max, for your leadership of the foundation as well. I got to see Dr. Price, who the first bill I ever passed in Congress was working with Texas A&M to make sure land-grant universities like ours could have access to USAID and help tackle some of the world's problems like hunger across the globe. That came right out of here at Texas A&M, and I also saw an old friend, Travis White, who already has hit me up for a contribution for the Aggie development world. So I know I'm right here at home. As Bill Flores will tell you, that there are no really ex-members of Congress who've represented A&M. We're all former, and we're we always miss representing this area, and always a little envious of those who get to represent this university, because it is such a remarkable institution with the Bush School and the library on top. It is just, again, second to none, in a joy to represent in Congress. And I would be remiss to not start today's talk over North American trade without thinking about my mentor, George H.W. Bush. John, as you know him well, he trailblazed the path for Nafta and USMCA. And I know Neil Bush, as you said, Raymond, is joining us on Zoom, so I'm automatically a little nervous just from having that great family being part of this. President Bush was my mentor. Helped me prior to getting in Congress, helped guide me on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'll tell you in a minute about trade, but I had the pleasure of following President Bush and then Chairman Bill Archer on the Ways and Means Committee and holding that seat. So when I retire, we will have had 55 years of continuous service and leadership on that committee that produced one president and 2 committee chairmen. You know, that's a great legacy for the state of Texas. For me, my thought all the time was I could never fill their shoes, but I could follow in their path. And trade is one of the paths that they led me down. In fact, shortly after I was elected to Congress, I sought out the advice of President Bush because I wanted to know where I could create jobs. I was a Chamber of Commerce executive, Royce. Our job was to start new businesses, recruit industries, build a business climate, and I wanted to do the same thing in Washington. President Bush advised me to follow international trade. He believed those customers and access to that could grow jobs and strengthen America. Every family, every worker, every business in America. He hooked me up with Secretary Baker, who gave me, Frank, exactly the same advice on international trade, and introduced me to Bob Zellick, who is coming here as well, who would later become the U.S. Trade Representative of President Bush. And because of the complexity of trade, it touches political issues, economic issues, cultural issues. What I wanted to do was to get engaged in a trade agreement from the very beginning, from the outset of the discussion to the negotiations, to its passage, to its entry into force, and later through the dispute process that invariably follows these. And so I went to the White House. I had a chance in the White House dining room to visit with Ambassador Zellick, and he after we talked about it, he invited me to play a role in Congress as point man for what he called a very strategic, non-controversial trade agreement he was proposing in Central America. So little did I know, I jumped at it, little did I know that it would consume years of my congressional life and be one of the most politically difficult agreements to pass since NAFTA. But it was worth every hour of it. And ultimately, I had a chance to lead on trade in Congress, both on the free trade agreements and on bringing Russia and China into the WTO, as well as major challenges on building trade rules for Congress and the White House to work on together. If you don't remember anything else I talk about today, I hope you'll consider this. I believe completely in free trade. It is the greatest economic freedom we possess. It lies at the heart of our free enterprise system, and it's crucial for the American people to understand, especially these days, that the term free trade, like free speech, doesn't refer to its cost. It refers to the freedom to trade, the freedom to trade. It's about preserving and expanding our right, our individual and collective freedom as Americans to buy, sell, and compete anywhere in the world with as little government interference as possible. So to that entrepreneur toiling late into the evenings and weekends for perhaps years on your breakthrough idea, this freedom to trade ensures you have the opportunity to place that product in the market here in America and around the world. For American consumers, for us, our families, for that single mom trying to stretch every dollar she has, the freedom to trade protects your ability to choose from the broadest range of products at the prices that are right for you. And one of the reasons I love free trade is it answers a key question. Who has the power? Who has the power to decide what products you can buy and at what price? Is it Washington? Is it special interests? Is it union, or is it you, the consumer? The freedom to trade ensures that that power always rests with the consumers. And I'm also convinced at a time we live in a world that is increasingly, chafes at the establishment, the freedom to trade is perhaps the most anti-establishment power Americans enjoy. It guarantees when a new product is designed, a better service is unveiled, a new breakthrough technology produced, that special interests can't hold you back from selling it, buying it, or even disrupting a whole industry because you've come up and built a better mousetrap. As Thomas Jefferson wrote, commerce, trade, with other nations is not only necessary and beneficial, it's a right and a duty. He's absolutely right. And often I think that freedom to trade is overlooked in America. And we ought to keep it at the forefront as we work through the trade debates of our time. America is made for trade. No state is more made for trade than Texas, where no one ships or sells more around the world than we do. We are awfully good at this. And the more we have that freedom to trade, certainly the better it is for Texas. But in many ways, too, what I've learned is that the power to trade is even greater than what I just laid out. The freedom to trade can lift individuals, communities, and whole countries out of poverty. Whole countries out of poverty. And so we know wherever the freedom to trade flourishes, wherever it's alive and well and practiced, poverty is reduced. Over the past few decades, more than 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the world, largely due to trade. Trade is now doubled as its share of the world economy, and research confirms that where the freedom to trade takes place, you have higher incomes, more affordable products, economic growth, human rights, and even stronger environmental protections. And that's why the subject today, the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, I think is so important. In October 1992, when President Bush joined leaders from Mexico and Canada to initial the original Nafta agreement in San Antonio, he described the agreement as a turning point in the history of our three countries. And he was exactly right. He said, we're creating the largest, richest, and most productive market in the entire world, a market of 360 million people that stretches 5,000 miles. He said this is an achievement of three strong and proud nations, expresses our confidence in economic freedom and personal freedom in our people's energy and enterprise. And again, he was exactly on target. Over the next quarter of a century, NAFTA achieved many of the goals that President Bush set out for it. Quadrupled trade between our three nations, much greater choice of affordable products, sales of more made-in-America products and services. We saw more affordable energy to fuel growth, and integrated supply chains that allowed our farmers and workers and businesses to combine the strengths of our three countries in such a way that we could compete and win anywhere in the world, against China, against Europe, against our competitors as well. NAFTA did strengthen Mexican democracy and human rights by helping make it more stable and more prosperous. And we saw in Texas, especially in Mexico, along our border, major infrastructure projects that played key roles in improving the environment between our state and Mexico. The reason for a new NAFTA became very clear over the years. The world just doesn't stand still, nor does our economies. Today, there are over 280 trade agreements in place around the world. Economies, technologies, consumer demands continue to evolve. But NAFTA was 25 years old. It was far past time for it to be modernized. And it's precisely that goal that led the Trump administration in a divided House and Senate one Democrat, one Republican, to forge together a new agreement with Canada and Mexico. So in every new agreement you have, and especially one that is a long-standing partnership, first keep what you know works, and that's exactly what the new agreement did. So it retained many and continues to retain many of the most successful foundations of NAFTA, including zero tariffs on all U.S. goods exported to Mexico and nearly all the products to Canada as well, including new openings for dairy, wine, and poultry. But it desperately needed to be modernized. And the point that I made to some of the students today at the Bush School was this agreement wasn't necessarily about quantity, how many more goods would be sold between the three countries, although it does that. It's about quality, about what changes were made that drive the freedom to trade in such a better way in the 21st century. So the goal was to lock in the key Mexican reforms in energy and telecommunications, to create a level playing field for financial services and investment, which didn't even really, in a significant way, exist in the agreement when NAFTA was originally negotiated. We established the best digital trade rules of any trade agreement in existence, which makes us the world leader in the digital economy. New protections for intellectual property, like patents, new tools to guard against counterfeiting and piracy, and modern science-based food safety standards important to universities like Texas A&M and states like Texas, where we not just only produce, but we know we've got to export to customers all throughout the world. One point to consider about this agreement that makes it a 21st century agreement is that it addressed barriers beyond the border. So before the 2000s, really most trade agreements were about tearing down barriers, usually tariffs and quotas, to allow us to sell two-way into a country or a region. But countries became sophisticated and lifted barriers. They created barriers beyond the border. And it was what I would describe as, when we tried to do business in certain countries and certain regions, it was like trying to put an American plug into a European socket. It simply didn't fit, and it was designed not to fit. 21st century trade agreements, including USMCA, is all about connecting markets, giving us the ability through services, technologies, finance, and intellectual property to connect economies, to make it easier for us not just to invest, but to sell and export in these new countries. And so that's what USMCA did, and I think in a significant way. So now these three countries are voluntarily removing regulations and technical barriers that discriminated against each other, modernize the customs procedures, streamline the ability for us to move legal goods safely across the border to all three countries. This agreement also spurs U.S. innovation. Again, an area we lead on in significant ways, shortening the time for American inventors that had to wait for patents. It shortened the time and accelerated the ability to bring new products to market, especially among our small businesses in America. And all of that done in a way that prevented our foreign competitors, especially aggressive ones like China, from getting a leg up. We also know governments can erect barriers, intended and otherwise. So the new USMCA rules ensure that when you have a state-owned enterprise really governed or directed by a government, central government, doesn't allow it really to distort competition with private businesses. And there were new rules and vehicles to launch antitrust investigations, put in place some key rules that made this bipartisan. And this is an important point as well. Trade is bipartisan, but it had been getting less so over the years. Republicans were traditionally very pro-trade, but we always needed Democrats who were pro-trade as well to pass any of these agreements. They had to be bipartisan. But every agreement got tougher and tougher as the Democrat portion shrunk. We needed to find a new framework that would allow both parties to join together, enhancing that freedom to trade. To their credit, President Trump and the U.S. Trade Ambassador Bob Lighthizer told us from the very beginning that they were going to build Democrat support for this agreement and for free trade, to buttress our traditional Republican support. I'll be honest, I was skeptical. The trend was going exactly the wrong direction. And with the president, I thought it would be very difficult to build that support. But for that goal, what the administration did was include the strongest and most enforceable labor provisions of any American trade agreement in history. This agreement requires Mexico to create a true union system in that country, including collective bargaining rights, a secret and personal voting, the right to strike, and tools to protect American or Mexican union workers against violence. For labor Democrats in Washington, this is a dream come true. They achieved provisions in labor and the environment they had never achieved to date under any agreement under any president. So this agreement at the end of the day drew support from former Obama cabinet officials and even the former chairman of the Democrat National Committee. Mexico, and the reason this worked, is Mexico had already passed a new labor law that was really transformational in their country. Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar and I visited Mexico to assess their progress, and it was clear to us that Mexico was serious about moving away from an economic model that based on how low wages can we pay to an economic future based on higher wages in productivity and growth. So for the U.S., this was significant because American workers had for so long been forced to compete against artificially low Mexican wages. This had a big impact on autos, which is why in this agreement for American autos, the new agreement will generate over $34 billion in new investment in American manufacturing, create 76,000 American jobs in the auto sector as well, and requires greater content from the U.S. and North America in vehicles from Mexico and Canada. So, in higher wages for those workers as well. So, I think President Trump was right to insist that we had to level the global playing field for American companies. He knew we needed new customers that would complement our new tax reform, most competitive tax economy now in the world, and he knew that this would benefit states like ours. No state benefited more from Nafta or USMCA than Texas, supporting almost 1 million jobs here. Ag, of course, was a big winner in all of this. But what I saw at the end of the day was beyond all expectations, an agreement that would draw historic support from Republicans and Democrats. It was the biggest bipartisan support for any major trade agreement in history, and I was really proud for the first time since I had been there that all members of the Texas delegation, House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats joined together to support this agreement. Something, frankly, I thought I would live my life without seeing. So it was really exciting, and as everyone in this room knows, to succeed, you can't just have a good trade agreement. You need to enforce it. It needs to be held accountable. Everybody needs to be held accountable, and new tools were put in place in this agreement to do exactly that. So we're going to talk a little in a minute about the impact of USMCA on trade going forward. I think it's a framework that can be used in certain regions that can continue the momentum we have from that bipartisan majority. And with that, happy to stop and take some easy questions from the audience that the doctor has for me. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for your
Sure,
remarks,
thank you.
Congressman. They were fantastic, and they helped to provide some historical context of NAFTA and the USMCA. I want to start with a very simple question. USMCA went into effect in July of 2020. Since then, we've seen some pretty dark days of the pandemic, and perhaps the pandemic affecting the progress of our trade relationships, and I'm wondering what now with respect to the USMCA? I mean, what do we expect to see from it, and what should we look for?
So I think, like COVID itself, it was a tough year and a half or two on those relationships, but I think a couple things happened. One is that because we'd lowered so many barriers and our supply chains were more integrated, because we're stronger with the three countries than just with one, it did help us, I think, in the supply chain, both on PPE, issues like that, I think were very helpful. But I think the greatest opportunity is going forward. We now know, everyone in this country knows that due to COVID, we learned that we were, as a country, far too dependent on China for crucial medical supplies, medicines, the ingredients to manufacture them, even some key technologies. We now believe that the solution in a greater independence really lies on anchoring supply chains in America and running through reliable trading partners like Mexico and Canada. And that is, to me, this wonderful opportunity. Both Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. all recognize this is a perfect partnership for us, built on now, more than a quarter of a century of relationships, but with a new agreement that makes those supply chains, I think, more likely to occur. So, yeah, we did, everyone got hit with COVID. I think it was helpful during the period. I think it will be even more helpful as we anchor those supply chains and make them more reliable.
What was the most difficult aspect or the most difficult issue to resolve in the renegotiation of Nafta?
So there were several. I think 3/4 of the time on the negotiations really centered around autos. As you know, President Trump was really focused on what he thought was an unfair playing field for American manufacturers of vehicles. And so probably 3/4 of negotiations centered around what would be a fair approach if Mexico, for example, or Canada is going to get tariff-free treatment of their vehicles. What are those conditions? And so they aggressively negotiated for higher U.S. Content there to be able to be tariff-free, not just in the vehicles, but in specific parts, in the steel and aluminum. It was specific that way. This was an approach that was sort of present in NAFTA, nothing to this degree. So that was without doubt probably sucked up 3/4 of the oxygen in the negotiations there.
Yeah, can I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Yeah.
Were the negotiations or the playing field, was it as unfair to the United States as President Trump suggested?
Yes and no. Yes, from the standpoint of those lower wages were really tough to compete against. We had seen a lot of the U.S. Parts suppliers move that direction. And so, yes, there was some truth to that, no question about that. The other thing that contributed to that were transshipments from China and other countries we didn't have trade agreements. They were trying to move it through the back door, through Mexico predominantly. And so, yeah, that was having an impact. I still think, though, Doctor, that a lot of our trade woes were really due to our tax code. We had the highest corporate rate in the world. We were the only country, I think us and North Korea maybe, that had a tax. That's not the neighbor you want to be with, just so you know. In Syria, I think, that had a tax code that taxed American businesses here and taxed them abroad. We actually penalized them if they succeeded around the world and brought their profits back to America. It was crazy. So we redesigned the tax code, not just the rates, but we did it in a way where American companies could compete and win anywhere in the world, including here at home. So I think it was a combination of that agreement, those lower wages, the transshipments, and then ultimately our tax code really discouraged investment in manufacturing in America. After we changed it, thank you, Bill Flores, for your work there, we saw, after years of America giving up on manufacturing jobs, remember the magic wand? We're not going to see them return. They returned. 500,000 new manufacturing jobs in the first year because we were competitive again. So I think it was a combination of the trade provision and a tax code that had grown hopelessly uncompetitive.
Great. We have some wonderful questions coming in about China, about Russia and Ukraine. Please send us your questions on the scan card on the programs, or some of the Bush School ambassadors can help you submit your question. So I'm going to take one of the questions that came from our audience, Congressman. And the first one is about China. And the question is, with the growing aggression of China, how do you move essential trade away from China to new partners? Sorry, a couple of questions just came in, how do you move with the growing aggression of China? How do you move essential trade away from China to new partners and home?
Yeah. So because China's predatory trade practices had gotten so beyond the norm and so damaging, we'd been seeing businesses start to relocate their supply chains out of there and into Southeast Asia and in other countries, other regions as well before that. But it became very clear as China's aggression generally, human rights issues, all of this, piracy, forced technology transfer, putting Communist Party folks on the boards and operations of these companies, our businesses had begun to start to move supply chains out of there to the degree they could, but China's, commodities and products and rare earth minerals and all that, made some of that difficult. So it had started to occur. We believe one of the best ways to anchor them in the U.S. is not to mandate a Made in America policy where this is the only place you can build them. Because the truth is, our companies, manufacturing technology services, they need to be able to compete and win around the world as well. Sometimes that means you need to manufacture or distribute or do the research in another region to access those customers, to beat China, beat Japan, and others. So we believe the right answer is anchoring those supply chains. We think tax incentives that provide real life reasons to anchor those supply chains here in America are the answer to that, because those companies are looking to make location decisions. They have lots of options around the world. Keeping tax rates low, giving them the ability to compete and win, and especially if they decide they're looking at their numbers, where do we locate this new manufacturing plant? For medicines, medical supplies, all of that. In my view, we needed stronger incentives to make sure that location decision tilted our direction.
Okay. Similarly, we talked a little bit about your assessment earlier of the Biden administration's emerging trade policy, but what are the chances of restarting the TPP in your opinion?
Yeah, so not very high. And I think here's been a challenge. So we were talking earlier today, every new administration needs a little time to get the trade policy legs under them. So understandable. They hired a really talented trade ambassador in Catherine Tai, comes from the Ways and Means Committee, Democrat side. But I really have such a high opinion of her that I and Chairman of the committee, Richie Neal, went to the Senate to support her nomination. I believe she's first rate in so many ways. The challenge this past year has been the trade agenda of the Biden administration appears to be much like the overall agenda, which is climate change, labor rights, empowerment and diversity issues, and not opening up new markets. It's as if we have a de facto trade moratorium on new free trade agreements. And that worries me. And we're in a lot of discussion with the administration and some Democrats joining with us. America has to lead on trade. We have to lead on trade. You can't sit on the sideline because right now China, Europe, Japan, Canada, Mexico are out there cutting trade agreements that advantage their farmers and their manufacturers and their businesses. If we're not out there setting the standards and the rules, as you know, it's not enough to buy American, you got to sell American. And with other countries getting those agreements, they tend to cut us out. So we continue as Republicans to urge the Biden administration, don't squander the momentum from USMCA, build off it. We think this can be bipartisan, but with 95% of the world's customers outside of America, we've got to be leading on trade. And so I'm hopeful that they'll course correct here, especially with the new year. Perhaps we need, as you know, the economy needs workers. We need customers. Trade is how you do the second. So, and the reason I hold out hope is that President Obama came into office without any trade agenda, and frankly didn't really care if he had one. But as he learned and working with our allies and our economy, realized how important it was for us to be out there, tearing down those America need not apply signs, giving us a chance to sell two-way into these countries, not just one way into us, two-way back to it. And so, I don't know, we continue to engage with Ambassador Tai, Commerce Secretary, and others to end this moratorium, and let's get out there and lead. I don't know what the prospects are.
Only time will tell. So some of these next couple of questions are going to shift to U.S.-Mexico relations. And the first one is, how do you think we could improve the infrastructure in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, especially if we allocated part of the earnings from border crossing fees to the border towns and cities?
Yeah, so I think we've got a vehicle within USMCA that we had in Nafta, which is the North American Development Bank. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but it's pretty close to that. And so it's really designed to create the financing and the capital to be able to do those infrastructure projects and the environmental projects, whether it's water, sewer, and others along our border. Henry Cuellar, to his credit, and Senator Cornyn were big champions on refunding and refinancing that bank to go along with the USMCA. So I think that's one source. The border crossing fees, unfortunately, are already spoken for in a couple different ways. One of them obviously is America used to be one of the fastest and most streamlined in moving products across our borders. After 9/11, for good reason, we fell back a lot because we emphasized security. So right now, one of my first bills, is actually I think my second one, as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, was reforms to Customs and Border Patrol that would accelerate, streamline, move across faster while we're keeping it secure. We use those customs fees and those crossing fees and others to help finance the infrastructure on trade facilitation. So I think between the bank, which can be used and accessed for North America, and as well as I think better facilitation, we can improve some of that infrastructure.
So kind of big question following up on that. Do you think that border security kind of undermines some of America's larger economic imperatives?
So from what standpoint?
I mean, from the standpoint of interconnected economies, and I look at it as somebody who studies the drug trade. For example, El Chapo, and we devote a lot of money towards border security, but he admitted in his trials that many people cross through legal, most of the drugs are coming in through legal crossings or cross points. And we want to, the border security situation looks very different from at the U.S.-Canada border as opposed to the U.S.-Mexico border. And I'm just wondering if this idea to, as you say, these free trade agreements are going to propel hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty. I mean, what role border security plays in that? Because if we're trying to kind of have this open sort of North America and there's lots of militarization on the border, I mean, is there any sort of, is there any sort of disconnect, or does border security in that sense and having secure borders and focus on our national security, does that undermine our possibilities economically? Yeah,
so a couple ways to look at that. One is that without question, if you have a good free trade agreement, you're creating better investment in countries, your trading partners, including in Mexico. That helps lift the standard of living. That should create more job opportunities. It should help on migration type issues. Secondly, security plays a big role in commerce, for the most part, slowing it down to make sure we're getting it right. You know what I mean? That we're not allowing transshipments, fentanyl from China, smuggled goods, people, guns, all the above. It's caused us, as you'd imagine, to really go security first and commerce second. So that does have impacts there. I'm I'm one of those Republicans who believe, we need to shut the back door of illegal immigration so we can keep open the front door of legal immigration. And that front door, by the way, is kind of broken in many ways. And I think free trade agreements that elevate economies, smart investments on shutting that back door, and some real reforms on shutting the back door, but that front door. The truth is, as a country, we want to welcome people who come here. We have to insist they play by the rules. And I think some reforms on how we grant visas and citizenship, we ought to elevate the skills. That we're one of the few countries where your ability to get a green card and immigrate depends on who you know, your family, for the most part, not on what you bring to the country and what skills you might bring to help elevate our economy and meet our workforce needs. So, I think the more secure border, the stronger economies all contribute, but we have to have some real changes in how we address immigration.
Absolutely. Another question that was submitted from the audience: why did Nafta fail to spur lasting American real wage growth, and how will USMCA succeed in this area?
Yeah, so a couple reasons. Kind of goes back to the earlier question here. One, because of low wages, issues like that in Mexico, it was tough for some of our industries to survive. They had to move, especially our suppliers, parts suppliers, to a lower wage just to be able to compete against other countries who were selling into here as well. So that was one of them. But I also think, again, I come back to taxes. So for 10 years, before we changed the code in 2017, our wages had been stagnant. I mean, literally almost no pay growth. Manufacturing jobs were just a giant sucking sound around the world, not to Mexico only, but around the world. Our job growth was really tepid, less than 2%. And everyone said, this is the new normal in America. We're a mature economy, we're not gonna do better than this. We knew that wasn't the case. And we knew our tax code had become one of the worst in the world. So when we changed that, we saw a dramatic change in real wage growth. For example, in 2019, so 1 year after we saw the new tax code and how it might be working, so in one year we saw three things. We saw household income for families go up more in 1 year than all 8 previous years combined. So a dramatic change in paychecks going up. We saw people coming off the sidelines, and those who had the highest pay raises were blue-collar workers, low-income workers, minorities, women, and those who'd been left behind. And we also in 2019 saw income inequality begin to shrink for the first time in half a century, simply by creating an economic environment that created more opportunities and rising paychecks. And those paychecks were going up twice as fast as inflation. So trade was one issue for those flat, stagnant paychecks and sort of the loss of purchasing power. But I think a tax code that punished investment in the U.S. And had less economic freedom, I think that was one of the barriers we had to remove. They're sort of intertwined.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Trade, our competitiveness, where you invest, where you make that decision to put the R&D. We know research and development spurs advanced manufacturing. That's why we push so hard to do research and development in America. Another reason we need to double our research and development tax credit and make it permanent, because when we put it in place in 1980, it was the best in the world. Today, it's close to 30th in the world. The rest of our global competitors are really aggressive. So we can get stronger economic growth if we set a goal as being the most innovative nation on the planet, and we've introduced legislation to do that. Our Ways and Means Republicans have done that. So.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
A question about possible Russian engagement with Ukraine. What impact do you think that will have on the trade policies of the United States and its partners? I mean, what's the most serious impact that you see it happening?
Yeah, so beyond the disruption in the economy, which we'll see what that is, energy obviously is the most prevalent one. Bill knows this well from his time in Congress and his professional history as well. It has certainly made it clear, just as we were too dependent on China during COVID for those areas, the world's too dependent on Russia, especially Europe, for their key energy issues. America is more dependent. We're more dependent on Russian oil and energy than any time in the last decade and a half. We've now vaulted to the number 2 supplier for America. We've got to use our production here and our ability to export crude oil and natural gas to wean regions around the world away from the Russian energy, dirty energy, by the way. America should be that reliable trade partner there. And so we've gotten some opportunities in trade and energy specifically. We had one of the students ask a similar question this afternoon, and I've been sort of thinking what other trade impacts might come from that, and I don't know yet.
This question is a little bit similar to the one that we started with in terms of what we should be looking to in the next 20 to 30 years with respect to the USMCA, but with Mexico in particular, what are the changes in USMCA, or what's the kind of impact that we expect to see in Mexico in the long-term future if the USMCA is successful?
So Mexico is going through transformation in some good, some bad. They are reneging dramatically on the commitments they made on energy in the USMCA, and you're going to see, hopefully, a strong pushback from the administration. We haven't seen it yet, but that's going to be key, both through their economic growth, their ability to grow and have affordable energy that's dramatically cleaner than theirs. I think that's going to be one byproduct from USMCA. I do think with more barriers removed between the 3 countries, I think you will see better and stronger and more reliable supply chains in North America that allow the 3 of us both to compete internationally better, but also to have more control over our strategic products and services. Fantastic.
There are some questions about the next steps in your career and your proudest moments in Congress, and I think you have some supporters in the audience, and we'll definitely end with those. But I want to ask a couple of other questions about the long-term implications of USMCA and other trade policies here. And if you'll forgive me for just scrolling through and finding one that we haven't seen yet. Is there a threat of seeing auto manufacturers who do not agree with the labor wage provision leave North America entirely to seek cheaper labor?
I don't think so. I think the provisions in USMCA will hold. The question right now, the dispute is about the interpretation of how these rules of origin, where does the content come from? I think that will be worked out in the dispute process. So I'm hopeful not. I think we may be launching a new trade war with Mexico and Canada, I hope not, who see these provisions in Build Back Better that are dramatic subsidies for electric vehicles based on U.S. content and based on production within labor states and facilities. Mexico and Canada see those provisions on electric vehicles as existential to their auto industries. So that's not passed yet, may well not be, but if it is, we're gonna have some big changes there. You know what I mean, in the relationships on vehicles between the 3 countries.
I have another question here from the audience about agriculture and free trade. How far should our trade policies go to protect American farmers and ranchers?
So, no one's better at competing than U.S. Ag. Texas among the best. It's interesting, in agriculture we have some of the most free trade industries in the world, and we have some of the most protectionist, like sugar, frankly, in the world. And there's no question, ag industries are sensitive all over the world. They're always a sticking point in trade agreements. And there was one day where I started a breakfast with one group, not to be named, who told me how, you can't allow any more of this product into America, and they were all in, I think $1,000 suits. And then the next meeting was with some of our ag folks from Texas, dressed in jeans and button downs and comfortable, who said, we want to compete, we want free trade, we can compete and win against anyone, open some markets for us and let us do it. And so within ag, I think probably every country shares that same feeling. And so it's a factor in every agreement. And every country wants you to give up on ag stuff, and every country wants to protect certain parts of ag industry. So it is a bit complicated.
Is there likely to be a future economic agreement that can rival the influence of China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Not necessarily on the horizon. We've got to understand how aggressive China is economically around the world. And it is both a bait and switch with developing countries where you loan them money and they get in debt and can't repay, and suddenly China's in charge of their ports, or some other key infrastructure. They're very aggressive. Even vaccine deployment around the world, there's a reason why China is aggressively getting vaccines at no or low cost into developing regions. It is all part of this very aggressive economic agenda from China. So they are very deliberate about their road and path forward. I think one of the key areas for America has to be Asia Pacific region. That's really key. I think much of that region wants us to be more engaged to counter China's practices and influence there. I think moving away from Trans-Pacific Partnership to more regional or country-by-country trade agreements had an impact. I think it's time for us to re-engage in that region, and I think there's bipartisan support, Doctor, for doing exactly that. It may not mean we join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It may be another more creative approach. Biden administration think it's this new Indo-Pacific framework. That's it. We don't know if it's real or not. All I know is that half of all the world's middle-class customers are in the Asia-Pacific region. So it's sort of like when you ask Willie Horton, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's where the money is. Why do you want to be in Asia-Pacific? That's where the customers are at. That's where we need access there, and that's where you counter China's aggressiveness. So we've got to find a creative way, and I think there'll be bipartisan support for doing that.
What effect do the current sanctions on Russia have on our trade? Will future sanctions on Russia continue to affect trade?
Yeah, it depends how aggressive they are. Obviously we imposed a bunch with Crimea, and that it became a nothing burger. You know what I mean? Both in impact. Yeah. It had some impacts, but not large. So the question is, how aggressive will these be? I mean, will the Biden administration, cut off access to U.S. currency? Dramatic change, all directions there. Will Europe and the U.S., if Putin just goes into these separatist regions and stops and plants, what will our response be there? Will it be to push them back there or accept that invasion, that incursion? I don't have a crystal ball on what those impacts could be.
What do you see for the future of democratic reform to the tax reform you worked on in 2017? You have a good relationship with Chairman Neal. How will your retirement impact those reform conversations?
Yeah, so right now, if my job is to protect those tax reforms and those tax cuts. Democrats see it a different way, including Chairman Neal, who is wonderful to work with, by the way, and we found common ground on a lot of things, but the way they're proposing $1.2 trillion of tax hikes land on job creators, make U.S., I consider it's almost an economic surrender to our foreign competitors, and really punishes small businesses and those who invest in our local communities. No country has ever levied tax hikes on job creators trying to fight your way out of an economic crisis. No one in history has done that for good reason. That's not when you do it. And especially now, those tax hikes could drive up inflation even higher on customers. And so I think they're misguided in their tax hikes and policies. I actually think it'll reverse so much the gains we saw for low-income, blue-collar workers in the U.S. And there's no reason for us to voluntarily become less competitive against the rest of the world. Because since we did our tax reform, 12 countries have lowered their taxes. So if we thought they were going to sit around and let us jump to the number one position, they're not. They're very aggressive. So we need to be aware we have to remain aggressive too.
Okay.
You almost got me going there. You know what I
Well,
mean?
that's exactly
On
what
tax stuff. Yeah, sorry about that.
Well, we don't have any additional questions coming in, so I want to just ask one final question, and more of a reflection question. The first is, I mean, you're retiring after serving in Congress for, you said, 26 years.
Yeah.
Which, that's, I mean,
Goes fast.
could we end by you reflecting on what your proudest moment in Congress is? And there's actually a specific question that says it's asking about Kevin 2.0 in the next chapter. There's
2.0.
3.0,
Yeah.
sorry, 3.0.
3.0. Yeah.
3.0. So if you
Do I
could,
get new software and hardware?
Yeah,
Does that come with all that
it's-
stuff? I could use it. So one, I love my job, still do after 26 years. It really is a joy. I love who I work with on both sides of the aisle. And so I'm not leaving because I'm discouraged or disheartened, just the opposite. I'm really pretty optimistic about Congress. There is, what I tell people, there's a middle class in Congress. You know, these are people on both sides of the aisle. They get up every morning trying to do a good job. They work really hard. They represent their district. But you don't see them and you don't hear them because they don't do dumb things. They don't say dumb things. They work very hard. And I always wish I could introduce more of America to the middle class. And I'm a very conservative Republican, as Bill is. But there is a way to find common ground on issues. And we've certainly done that with Chairman Neal on a lot of them as well. So I'm leaving Congress the way I came in, which is I'm really pretty optimistic about our country. And I haven't seen a problem yet in Washington we can't solve. I've not seen one yet. All the big ones are hard. So yeah, I'm leaving. It's a bittersweet year. I'm enjoying every moment of this year, including today, which has just been remarkable. But yeah, after 26 years, the Lord just sort of tells you when it's time to do a new adventure. So, you know, my wife especially is looking forward to whatever new adventure might be. And our boys are, you know, out of high school, and one's already working, and the other one is starting college in his life. And so, yeah, looking forward to whatever Kevin 2.0 or 3.0 is.
3.0.
I'm kind of excited. The only problem I've got is we've been redistricted. So the Woodlands is now in the district held by Dan Crenshaw, you know, who's American hero, wonderful, now on the Energy and Commerce Committee, wonderful person as well. But my problem is Congressman Crenshaw keeps texting me links to internship opportunities in his district, saying you may not be qualified, but I'll consider you, for internship stuff. And so, yeah, hopefully we're going to stay in Texas. We love it here, and hopefully we'll be somewhere in tax or trade or healthcare, some kind of service there. And if we've learned anything from the Bush School, it is you got to commit to a lifetime of service, right? So you do that at every opportunity. If you're working career-oriented or even as you find those new adventures, you got to give back to the community that you live in, the country you live in. We learned that from the Mossbachers, the Bakers as well. So yeah, I hope to follow that type of service in whatever the new adventure is.
Well, we hope that you'll stay in touch, Congressman, and we have enjoyed speaking with you and visiting with you all day today. And thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you all.
Thank
very
you
much.
all for coming.